Chapter 8. Amy pulled a disgusted face as she watched Merlin drop a strand of her fiery red hair into the mix, followed by a strand of the Lomnant's dark black hair. They had managed to clear up a workplace and salvage enough vials and ingredients to make the potion. But Amy wished the process had taken longer. She wouldn't tell the doctor, but she was dreading drinking the potion. "So, I'm supposed to drink this thing and turn into her?" Amy whispered to the doctor as she sat next to him. The doctor had been quiet for some time, staring blankly at the Lomnanta, and Sam and Dean were muttering something to one another in the corner. Rory was trying to help Merlin and Gaius in any way he could, but he seemed to just be getting in the way. "And then what?" she went on. "Do I follow them to the mothership and steal all their ray guns?" She let out a convincing chuckle. The doctor only sighed. He rested his elbows on his knees and cupped his hands in front of his lips. "I'm not positive they aren't from Earth anymore," he told her. This only made Amy confused. Of course they're not from Earth, she told herself. They can't really be magic, can they? "What are they, Doctor?" she asked instead, giving him a soft nudge with her shoulder. "I know you got a theory. What is it?" He didn't answer for a few beats. Finally, he looked at her and gave his small, thin smile, and Amy knew he was trying to give her confidence, even though he had none of his own on the matter. "Oh, don't worry about that now, Pond," he said. "You just find out what they're hiding, eh? And let's just hope I'm wrong." From across the room, Merlin held up a small purple-colored liquid in a glass vial to the candlelight. "It's ready," he announced to the others, and all conversations died away. "There's one more thing," Gaius told them, looking down and scanning a page of the potion with his finger. "It says the host can't be conscious while the potion is in effect." He glanced behind him at the Lamanta. "We're going to have to stun her somehow." "So what, we gotta put her on ice for a while?" Dean asked. The doctor was nodding swiftly. "Makes sense. Put the original in stasis to create a psychic link to the copy." "How are we supposed to do that?" Dean wondered. "I think I may have an idea," Merlin chimed in. He set the potion down on the tabletop and made his way over to Lamanta. She looked up at him with cold, threatening eyes. "Stand back," he told the others over his shoulder. He raised his palm and outstretched fingers toward the woman, and appeared to be thinking for a moment. When he spoke again, it was in a gravely voice that didn't seem to be his own. "Asetris bipedil artisan." The bonds around the Lamanta's wrists snapped, and her skin began hardening and turning a dull gray color. Her robes and hair did the same. The woman was left to her feet as the long stone wings grew from her shoulder blades. The last patches of flesh to be turned were around her dull blue eyes, which still stared menacingly at Merlin with a strange twinkle in them, and finally her stony hands moved unnaturally to cover them. Merlin lowered his hand and stepped back, a satisfied grin on his face. Having to hide his magic for so long, he was never one to make a spectacle out of it, and he felt turning the woman into her own guise was fitting. However, when he turned around, he realized no one else seemed to get the poetry behind it. They all stood gaping at him. "Dude, you turned her into a weeping angel." Dean was the first to speak up. "Wait, does this mean we'll have to play a game of red light, green light with her now?" The doctor reached into his pocket and took out the sonic screwdriver, steadily flashing the tip over the stone. "No, but she's not dead," he reported. "There are traces of cognitive energies, but they may just be residual." He looked at Amy. "Still, it should be enough to make a connection." "Way to go, Harry Potter," Dean said, and slapped Merlin on the back. Merlin wrinkled his nose at Dean, perplexed. "So," Amy spoke up. "My turn, I guess?" "You sure this will work? I mean, she won't be stuck looking like that forever," Roy said again, worry in his voice. But Amy waved the question away. Don't worry, stupid," she said, trying to sound brave. "It should be fun." Rory grabbed her by the arm. "Be careful," he warned. She let her bravado slip long enough to nod at him. Merlin handed her the vial, and she turned it over in her hands. "Cheers," she said at last, and swallowed it in one gulp. Merlin raised his hand again and chanted, "Pisse teroi ewelten harora from Geselta Elra." At first, nothing happened, and everyone held their breath. Then, slowly, Amy's orange locks began turning black, and her ivory skin dulled and appeared sickly. Even her clothes twisted and changed to resemble the dress of the Lamanta. Soon, she no longer looked like Amy. The doctor looked at her hard and then said, "How do you feel?" How do I look? Amy asked, but her voice sent chills down everyone's spines. It also made Amy jump and touched her throat. Oh, that's too weird. Oh, she said, now that she had gotten used to her new voice, and she looked towards the other. Anyway, how do I look? And don't say better than before. Not even a little, Dean answered with a hollow laugh, and then cleared his throat and looked down sheepishly when Rory glared at him. You look fine, Sam answered seriously. Just don't act so much like, well, Amy. Try and act like they would. She nodded, then forced herself to stand upright and still. That's better, Sam told her. The rest of the maids are staying in the servants' chamber, Merlin informed her. They're in the swing of the castle on the lower floors. Go now. We don't know when they plan to leave, and come straight back here when you return to Camelot. The potion won't last long. Righto, she said, then cleared her throat. Yes, my lord. She turned and exited the room. Merlin licked his lips and shuffled about awkwardly, but try as he might, he couldn't suppress a small smile at being addressed as a lord. Dean, follow her, the doctor said, waving in the direction of the door. Don't let her out of your sight. On it, Dean said, his eyes locked with Sam's in a silent look after yourself before he, too, exited the chambers. Without missing the beat, the doctor reached into his pocket and tossed the TARDIS key to Rory, who caught it only by reflex. Rory, take Sam to the TARDIS. A long time ago I was given swords, forged with dark matter, by the Duke of Jupiter for saving his daughter. Long story. Anyways, they should cancel out any energies sent out by the La Manta, so they might be good to have around. Should? Rory asked skeptically. The doctor ignored him. They're somewhere in the TARDIS. Maybe the attic. Maybe the closet. Maybe not. I can never remember. Check everywhere. Doctor, Roy protested. That's hundreds of rooms. I could take hours. We may not have hours, the doctor responded airily. Better start looking. Okay, Rory tried again. But the TARDIS is parked in the middle of the courtyard, right outside the castle. How are we supposed to get to it unseen? We don't exactly look like we're from around here, and he's supposed to be out on the run. He nodded towards Sam. Sam looked at Merlin. I'm guessing you don't have anything that can make us invisible? Merlin pursed his lips together and shook his head. Believe me, it'd make my life a lot easier if I did. Guess we'll just have to be extra careful then, Sam said with a shrug, looking at Rory and nodding towards the door. Rory followed him out. At this point, the doctor spun around to Merlin and Gaius, a broad grin on his face. Now, hope you two aren't too tired, because we got homework to do. Okay, so far so good, Amy thought, for what must have been the 20th time that night. It was well past midnight when La Manta had snuck out of the city and entered the forest beyond. At some points, she could hear a hissing command from another La Manta in her head, giving out orders on where to go. Amy prayed the La Manta couldn't hear what she was thinking. Every now and again, Amy glanced towards the dark trees around them, and she sometimes saw Dean's silhouette as he made his way stealthily through the forest, following the group. He'd been following them since they left Camelot. Amy assumed the doctor had sent him as backup. For once she was happy about that. Having someone else around may come in handy. After nearly 2 hours of walking, the group of La Manta came to a small hut built in the side of a hill, and Amy could see the warm glow of a fire coming from inside one of the windows. My queen, one of the La Manta in the front called, we have come for your final orders. Amy gulped as the door to the modest hut swung open, and a thin, pale woman with dark hair and a long, black dress appeared from the other side. Despite her wretched surroundings, she was beautiful, with a certain kind of malice about her. Welcome, she said. Her voice had an icy calm to it, and Amy noticed the way the woman walked, tall and upright, like she hadn't always lived in shambles. In fact, quite the opposite. Her posture reminded Amy of that all of the rich girls from her old school. La Manta kneeled before the woman, and Amy decided she'd better do the same. Looking up at the woman, Amy saw her smiling slyly at the reverence she was given. Oh yeah, Amy thought, definitely a rich girl. Please, the woman said, get up. I'm sure you have much to tell me. The La Manta did as they were told. Meanwhile, Dean used the shadows of the trees to sneak to the other side of the hut, and crouched down against one of the walls, his gun held up and ready in his hands, in order to better hear what the woman was saying. Is Arthur dead yet? She said coldly. Queen Morgana, one La Manta hissed. He lives. Amy saw the woman's, Morgana, she now assumed was her name, smile fall. Why is this? His queen has not returned, the same La Manta told. You have given us order to kill them both. Morgana stayed calm. Yes, I believe I have. My queen, there is more, another Lamanta said, getting Morganta's attention. The messenger whom you had us kill in the forest has escaped before he perished. Morgana turned her cold eyes towards the speaker. The servant boy. He knows of us. Morgana took a sharp breath in. Merlin, she spat, as though saying his name left a disgusted taste on her mouth. He will be the ruin of me. We have sent one of ours to silence him, the Lamanta exclaimed. And? Tell her, sister, Amy heard inside her head. She realized at once that she was supposed to be the Lamanta that was sent to kill Merlin. He was nowhere to be found, my queen, Amy lied in a hissing voice, and the others seemed to accept this. Amy took a deep breath to calm herself, and averted her eyes to her hands. But this only made her panic more. Where the sickly extremities of the Lamanta were meant to be were her own polished fingernails and porcelain skin. She gulped and tried not to shout. The potion was wearing off. Very well, Morgana was saying. If Merlin finds out our plans, it won't be long until he warns his precious Arthur. She seemed to think for a moment, and then said decidedly, You must kill the king tonight, once Camelot has fallen asleep. And what of his queen? A Lamanta asked. Once I take the throne, our dear Gwen will have nowhere she can hide, Morgana said flatly. You leave her to me. And the servant boy? Morgana shrugged apathically and waved the thought away. If he gets in our way, she said nonchalantly, kill him. The Lamanta bowed again and broke into a chant of Long live the Queen. As the Lamanta turned to disappear into the dark forest, Dean stayed behind, still crouched next to the wall. He watched as Morgana stood outside her hut, smirking, as the firelight made her pale eyes twinkle. After a moment, she made her way back inside the hut, and Dean took this opportunity to rush out of his hiding place and follow after Amy and the Lamanta. Just as he had gotten back into the cover of the trees, he heard a twig snap behind him. Instinctively, he spun around to face the noise, pulled out his Colt from the back of his jeans, and pointed in the direction of the intruder in one swift motion. On the other end of the gun was Lamanta, but she had two slender, clean hands held up in surrender. It's me, Amy whispered, her voice once again her own. It was strange to hear Scottish tones coming from the Lamanta's lips. Amy? Dean said. Man, don't sneak up on me like that. Don't be such a baby, she said. Now come on, we've got to get back to the doctor. She turned her head in the direction in which the Lamanta had disappeared, before they get to Arthur. Chapter 9. Merlin, Gaius, and the doctor had managed to sort through three-thirds of Gaius's library, provided the books weren't shredded or torn in two by the Lamanta's attack, in search of any information on their new foe. Gaius was certain he'd read about them in passing once before, and the doctor was eager to learn, but Merlin grew more restless and impatient with every passing moment. His eyes kept falling back on the statue in the corner of the room, looming over them. He couldn't be sure, but he could have sworn it had moved an inch or two to the left. Ah, yes, here it is, Gaius spoke up after a few hours. His thin spectacles were worn over his eyes as he held a thick, leather-bound book in one hand and brought it over to the others sitting at the table. The Lamanta, he explained. They're creatures of magic, but I'd say we'd already know that. It says here they were once ordinary women, servants, all of whom betrayed their masters, murdering them for their own freedom. As punishment, they were cursed many years ago by the Fisher King to forever follow and serve the will of another. But their greed and long life twisted them into monsters. Apparently, their magic is through touch, and they have the ability to move at swift speeds. Unless someone is looking directly at them, in which case they must slow to a normal pace. Well, that's not good, the doctor said. What if they're all running around together? How do they know where the other one is if they can't see each other? The tone in his voice suggested he already knew the answer. I believe they communicate with one another through telepathy, Gaius informed him from consulting the book once more. The doctor blew out his lips. That doesn't really tell us how to stop them, does it? I'm afraid not. Merlin slouched back in his chair. He was becoming very tired of running around in circles. In fact, he couldn't remember the last time he'd even slept. Gaius, he said, trying not to snap, do you think Geoffrey would have anything about how to kill them in his records? He assumed this would be another dead end, but he needed to get Gaius out of the room. Merlin had doubts that had been festering in his mind since the moment Sam arrived in Camelot. Doubts he wanted to express, but he wouldn't dare pass them on to Gaius in fear that the man may lose his belief in Camelot, or even in Merlin. I'm not sure, Gaia said, seeming to consider the idea. Of course, I can certainly check. Merlin nodded, trying to seem polite. Could you? The doctor and I will continue on here. Gaia seemed to accept this and took his leave, heading towards the records room. Merlin, As soon as he was sure Gaius was out of earshot, the doctor sat back and looked at Merlin. Something on your mind, Merlin? He gasped. I just don't see the point, Merlin said instantly. All inhabitations now dropped, and the doctor gave him a perplexed look. The others, they didn't even think Camelot existed until they got here. In the future, no one even cares. No one even remembers it. I don't see why I have so much responsibility. It's useless. Why I should fight for Camelot and for Arthur if it won't even matter in the end. If it's not even important. Merlin didn't know why he was telling the doctor all this, but he needed someone to talk to, and the doctor seemed like the man with all the answers. When Merlin looked at the doctor, he saw the man gaze at him with soft eyes. Not important, he repeated in a voice as soft as his eyes, almost as though he didn't believe what he was hearing. Is that what you really think? Merlin didn't answer. He didn't need to. You see, some things, the doctor began, some things are just too extraordinary for people to believe. So they get passed down as legends or stories. But do you really think that makes them any less important? Sometimes stories are more important and teach people more about life than anything in a silly old history book can. People will look at what you did here until the end of time. They will make songs and tales and even one or two blockbusters about you, forever, and no one will even forget Camelot or Arthur or the Knights of the Round Table, or you. Merlin averted his eyes and felt them well up, and he tried his hardest to fight the water from rolling down his cheeks. He hardly believed what the doctor was telling him, but he felt something that he realized he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I should thank you, Merlin told the doctor, with a shuddering breath in. But the doctor craned his neck to catch Merlin's eyes once more and smiled encouragingly. I should thank you. Merlin covered his lips with his fingers, but he could no longer hold back a smile. This place is incredible, Sam called for the 5th time, his eyes bright and his grin broad as he eyed every nook and cranny of the room. This must have been the 10th room they had searched for the swords, and Sam couldn't believe the sheer size of the spaceship. He had already seen the library, from which, for some reason, had a swimming pool in it. A few bedrooms in the attic among other rooms. They found themselves now in the doctor's study, which Rory said he rarely went in out of respect of the doctor's privacy. But this would have to be an exception. Sam was glad. The room was colored the same greenish tint as the rest of the ship, but it was lined with ceiling-to-floor bookshelves, leather chairs, paintings, and a fireplace that didn't seem to have a chimney. The inside of this ship seemed to go on forever, and Sam had to swallow the urge to point out the obvious and say, it's bigger on the inside. Rory was on the floor, sorting through some large black boxes on the bookshelves, as Sam looked around fascinated. Yeah, it's a different dimension than the rest of the universe. It's a type of technology from where the doctor's from, Rory told him in a preoccupied tone. Really? The doctor just likes it when people point out it's bigger on the inside. Sam opened his mouth to say something, but then decided against it. Instead, he said, God, I thought nothing else would be able to surprise me today. I mean, we're in Camelot after all. Rory stopped looking for a moment and sat back on his ankles. There were always rumors of Camelot back in the Middle Ages, he said, almost as though he was recalling a distant memory, all over the world, but I never took them seriously. Sam tilted his head at him. You've been a lot of places in this thing, huh? With the doctor? Rory met his eyes and nodded slowly. Sorry about him. He seems a bit strong, but he means well. Yeah, I notice. Sam couldn't help but ask. Who is he anyway? Honestly, no idea, he admitted. I don't think anyone really does. He's not human, I can tell you that much. He's something called a Time Lord. He noticed a look of wonder on Sam's face. You alright? Yeah, Sam said, pinching the bridge of his nose. He didn't really believe in aliens until that day. Time Lord, I guess that explains the time travel, huh? Must do, yeah, was the answer. Rory let out a short, soft laugh. It's funny, he told. I was training to be a nurse before I met the doctor. And me was just a kissogram. That all seems so far away now. I've seen things most people would never believe back home. Things right out of a science fiction film. I've been to hell and back. I've died at least 6 times. Sam pulled a face. He knew the feeling. But it's like, Rory continued, real life didn't start until we started traveling with the doctor. Sam leaned against the door frame and folded his arms across his chest. He wouldn't admit it, but he was somewhat jealous of Rory. In Rory's life, there was no Leviathan, no Michael and Lucifer, no yellow-eyed demons, just all of history for the taking. Sam wondered if Rory and Amy knew how lucky they were. And I've seen all sorts of sides of him since then, he heard Rory go on. Sides that are brave and selfish, and I've seen sides that I don't much like, too. He seemed to consider his own words, and then said, but I trust him with my life, and I trust him with Amy's. You should too, you know. Sam looked to the carpeted floor. Look, I'm not saying you have to like him. Just like I'm not saying your brother has to like a wizard, Rory said sensibly. You're naturally suspicious of people. That's easy to see. I'm sure you have your right to be, as a hunter or whatever you said you are. But if we're going to stop whatever is going on here, we have to start trusting one another. We're in this together, you know. A corner of Sam's lips twitched into a smile for a second. He found himself liking Rory. Yeah, Sam agreed softly, still looking at the floor. He knew Rory was right. If anything, they were all enemies of the same enemy. And Sam assumed greater alliances had been formed for less. They had begun working with one another the moment that Lamanta opened her mouth, and deep down they all knew it. She had given them a common goal, and if Sam was sure of one thing, it was that each member of their new little army had a knack for taking out the bad guys. Ah, Rory said, pulling out a long box from a shelf and opening it. From it, he lifted out a short, curved, black blade with a red handle to show Sam. You think this is it? He asked. Must be, Sam guessed. There are only 3, Rory informed him, leaving the box on the ground and standing up. But they're a bit heavy. Now I see why the doctor sent you. Sam let out a low chuckle at this and shook his head. We'd better get back, Rory said, checking his watch. Must nearly be sun up by now. Sam jerked his head back in shock. What? We've been in here for hours tops. Time's different in here, Rory said, especially when you're acting like a kid in a sweet shop. Sam mocked offense, but then found himself chuckling. Rory joined in. Dean and Amy, who was now back to her normal red-headed self, walked through the door and greeted the others, who had been waiting for them for a short time. Sam and Rory had returned just minutes ahead of them, having carried the weighty box between them and set it down on the wooden table in Gaius's chambers. Back to being Amy, Rory pointed out, relief in his voice. I was afraid I'd go ginge in the middle of every Lamanta, she said, taking a seat next to him at the table. Dean placed himself behind the chair Sam was sitting in. Yeah, but still me. What did you find out? Asked the doctor, who had himself seated on the steps outside of Merlin's bedroom. Do you know who's leading them? Hell yeah, Dean answered for her. Buckets of crazy, that's who. Sam looked up at his brother and shook his head. Want to share with the class? It was some chick in the middle of the woods, Dean told him with a shrug. From across the table, Merlin and Gaius exchanged looks. Some human chick. Kinda hot, actually. Morgana, Gaius said dryly. Amy nodded. Yeah, that was what one of the others called her. Queen Morgana. Who is she? Merlin squared his jaw. He had hoped that it wouldn't come to this, that it wouldn't be Morgana, but he should have known better. She's Arthur's half-sister, he told them. And a very powerful sorceress. She believed that the throne is rightfully hers. She'll stop at nothing to take it. If Morgana was behind all this, then they're in more trouble than Merlin thought. It didn't just mean the Lamanta were planning on bringing down Camelot. They meant to kill Arthur. Sure enough, Amy said. She gave them their final orders, to kill the king. She knows we know about the Lamanta. One of the messengers tell you about the Merlin. One of them saw the messenger tell you about the Merlin. Merlin thought back to the flash of white he'd seen in the forest right after the messenger died. They were waiting for the queen to get back so they could kill her too. But Morgana doesn't want to risk us stopping her, Amy went on. Doctor, they're planning on killing Arthur. Tonight. Merlin's heart skipped a beat. Too many times had Merlin gotten too close to getting what she wanted. Morgana gotten too close to getting what she wanted, and Merlin wouldn't give her another chance. Who knew if this was the day she succeeded? I can't allow that to happen, Merlin said defiantly, picking himself up from the table and making his way towards the door. He had to tell Arthur. He should have done so immediately. Merlin, wait, Gaius's voice stopped him. If you tell Arthur now, he'll want to take on the Lambda himself, with no one to aid him. All the knights have gone with Gwen, remember? Merlin took a sharp breath in and closed his eyes, hoping for a solution to come to him. None did. So he turned back around to face the others. So what do we do? Sam asked. We can't just let them kill him. We gotta tell him something. Merlin shook his head. Gaius is right, he said. Arthur won't stand a chance against their magic. Not alone. He'll be torn apart. We'll just have to beat them to him then, Dean said. But Merlin only half heard it. His eyes were now fixed on the angel statue, and he could feel a strong sensation overcome his body. He could hear his own heart thumping in his chest, and felt as though he was connected to the creature inside the stone, and it was telling him what he hoped beyond hope wasn't true. Arthur is going to die, he said, as though he were in a trance. He didn't know how he knew it, but he knew it was true. For a moment, all was silent. Then the doctor spoke up. He won't. This broke the spell, and Merlin looked to him, the man with all the hope. How do you know? The doctor lifted himself up and made his way to the middle of the room, halfway between Merlin and the others. You have to take my word on it, he said. But he saw this didn't satisfy Merlin. He continued after a heavy breath. Time is a tricky thing. Most moments have been changed, details can be altered, and the universe would compensate for it. But there are certain things that will always happen, that have to happen. They're fixed points in time. Arthur's death is one of them. Merlin's mouth hung open. All this time the doctor knew how and when Arthur would die, and he never said. Part of Merlin wanted to shout at him for not telling him, but the other part owed the doctor some reverence. He really was the man with all the answers. Arthur dies only after the creation of Albion, the doctor said, and that's not today. If we're very careful, we can make sure to stick to this rule of time, but we have to do everything right. I know you want to tell Arthur, Merlin, but you can't. Not yet. We have to find another way. He filled the gap between himself and Merlin and rested a hand on his shoulder. He said in a lower tone than before, We can still help him, Merlin. You can still save Arthur. He doesn't die today. Trust me. Merlin believed him, or at least he wanted to, more than anything. Sun's coming up, they heard Dean say, as brilliant shades of red began flooding the chamber. Merlin looked towards the window, wondering what the day would bring. Merlin, you must attend to your duties, Gaius told him, appearing behind the doctor. If you don't show up for work again, Arthur will become suspicious. What will you do? He asked, directing the question to the doctor. Oh, we'll keep busy. Don't worry about us, the doctor said. Actually, I'd like to spend some time examining our new piece of artwork. Merlin turned his head to the eerie statue in the corner. It made chills run down his spine, but he tried his best to hide it. As the royally sanctioned city planner, or as the doctor, Merlin joked, forcing a smile. The doctor returned the expression. Grabbing his jacket, Merlin again made his way to the door. But he heard the doctor's voice called after him, and remember, not a word about this to Arthur. Merlin paused for a moment, looking over his shoulder at the doctor, and then behind him to Sam, and almost as though he was asking if Sam trusted the man enough to believe him. There was a moment of hesitation, then Sam nodded to him. This seemed to strengthen Merlin's resolve. He closed the door behind him.